So this is class 1, their brother Jed Billington from the Okanagan Ecclesia, somewhere on the west coast, far away. So the series of these classes is titled, "The Palace is Not for Man." Our first class this morning is titled, "My Place Which Was in Shiloh," and our reading is going to be taken from 1 Samuel 2, verses 11 through 36. 1 Samuel 2, verses 11 through 36. And Elkanah went to Ramah to his house, and the child did minister unto the Lord before Eli the priest. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord. And the priest's custom with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant came while the flesh was in seething with a flesh hook of 3 teeth in his hand. And he struck it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the flesh hook brought up, the priest took for himself. So they did in Shiloh unto all the Israelites that came thither. Also before they burnt the fat, the priest's servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, "Give flesh to roast for the priest, for he will not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw." But if any man said unto him, "Let them not fail to burn the fat presently, and then take as much as thy soul desireth," then he would answer him, "Nay, but thou shalt give it me now. If not, I will take it by force." Wherefore the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord, for the men abhorred the offering of the Lord. But Samuel ministered before the Lord, being a child girded with a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother made him a little coat and brought it to him from year to year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And Eli blessed Elkanah and his wife and said, "The Lord give thee seed of this woman for the loan which is lent to the Lord." And they went unto their own home. And the Lord visited Hannah, so that she conceived and bare 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the child Samuel grew before the Lord. Now Eli was very old, and heard all that his sons did unto all Israel, and how that they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he said unto them, "Why do ye such things? For I hear of your evil dealings by all this people. Nay, my sons, for it is no good report that I hear. Ye make the Lord's people to transgress. If one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against the Lord, who shall entreat him for him? Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto the voice of their father, because the Lord would slay them. And the child Samuel grew on, and was in favor both with the Lord and also with men. And there came a man of God unto Eli, and said unto him, "Thus saith the Lord, Did I plainly appear unto the house of thy father, when thou wert in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? And did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, and to offer upon my altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? And did I give unto the house of thy father all the offerings made by fire of the children of Israel? Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice and at mine offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honorest thy sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel, my people? Wherefore the Lord God of Israel saith, I said indeed that thy house and the house of thy father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord saith, Be it far from me. For them that honor me, I will honor. They that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days come that I will cut off thine arm and the arm of thy father's house, that there shall not be an old man in thine house. And thou shalt see an enemy in my habitation, and all the wealth which God shall give Israel. And there shall not be an old man in thine house forever. And the man of thine whom I shall not cut off from mine altar shall be to consume thine eyes, and to grieve thine heart. And all the increase of thine house shall die in the flower of their age. And this shall be a sign unto thee, that shall come upon thy two sons, on Hophni and Phinehas. In one day they shall die, both of them. And I will raise me up a faithful priest, that shall do according to that which is in mine heart and in my mind, and I will build him a sure house. And he shall walk before mine anointed forever. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left in thine house shall come and crouch to him for a piece of silver and a morsel of bread, and shall say, Put me, I pray thee, into one of the priest's offices, that I may eat a piece of bread. So be pleased to give our attention to our brother Jed Billington for his first class.
Thank you, Brother Josh, and good morning, brothers and sisters and young people. I bring with me the love and greetings of your brothers and sisters in the Okanagan Ecclesia and the Seattle Ecclesia and the Vernon Ecclesia. So many have asked to be remembered to you out here, and no doubt you may remember them if I had the time to list all their names and show their pictures, but unfortunately we do not. We begin our series then on the palace is not for man, looking at Solomon's temple. And this may seem an unusual place to begin such a consideration, but the story of Solomon's temple is really the story of the Ark of the Covenant. It's the story of the Exodus. It's the story of the wanderings in the wilderness. It's the time of the judges. It's the time of the kings, and it's there at the fall of the nation. The palace established under the dynasty of David, under the inspired instruction that he received and that his son was privileged to build, was the pinnacle of the purpose of God with the nation for that time period. And if we hold our hand in 1 Samuel and turn back to Exodus 25, at the dawn of the nation of Israel, we'll see what God's intent was with the first inspired place of worship that he gave his children to build. Exodus chapter 25 and verse 8, he instructs Moses saying, Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. And we'll see, I hope, by the conclusion of today and by the conclusion of this series that has always been God's intent, to dwell with the men and women that he has created, to have a tabernacle with them, to have a place of rest, to have a sanctuary with his creation. And we'll see in our ensuing studies, as we look at the establishment of the house, as we look at the individuals that were involved in the planning, in the construction, and in the dedication of the house, that the theme of a resting place is prevalent throughout it. A resting place most specifically for the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat. And it is called by David, the temple is called by David a palace. And it's not a mistranslation from the Hebrew to the English. It is the word for palace. It's the same word used for Shushan, the palace. It's a palace for a king. And the mercy seat is his throne. It is the throne of grace. And when we consider the pattern of the tabernacle, when we consider the pattern of the temples, there's this progression that leads into an audience with the king at the mercy seat. David perceived the great privilege that he had to build a palace for his king. Not just a place to come and offer sacrifice and to offer prayers, but the King of Kings. The only king that could rule over other kings perfectly, and the king that David would gladly, as he says to Michal, make himself more ashamed and more, in Michal's eyes, humiliating before, because he was happy to shed the robes of a king before the throne of his king. So we begin the story not all the way back at the creation of the Ark of the Covenant, but here in Shiloh, where the tabernacle has been for some time. And it seems from looking at the context throughout the time of Samuel and the Judges, that, and even into the time of David, that the tabernacle had a circuit that it followed. It still existed in a transient form, where we'll see as we look here in 1 Samuel, the first few chapters, that there seems to be a permanent structure for the nation to come and worship at. But we see from other passages that the tabernacle was at that time in Gibeah, or in that season in Gibeah. So it seems to still have been used as a portable house of worship that would go on a circuit throughout the nation. But here in Shiloh, it had a permanent home that it would return to. If we turn to Joshua chapter 18, we'll see when Shiloh seems to have been established as the location of this structure, of the central location for worship in the land. We don't have any inspired instruction that this is the place that God has chosen to put his name, that this is where he wants the Ark of the Covenant to rest, and this is where he will build his house. But it seems to be a matter of convenience, and the people have chosen a nice place to set it up. So we have in Joshua 18 verse 1, the whole congregation of the children of Israel assembled together at Shiloh and set up the tabernacle of the congregation there, and the land was subdued before them. So we're now going to get into the time of the casting of lots, we're concluding the time of the casting of lots for those on the one side, and we're going into the casting of lots on the other side. And the time has just about completed for what we have in the record for the work of Joshua. There's not much left of Joshua in the record. And the tabernacle is set up at Shiloh with no direct instruction, with no command, with no verse that says, Yahweh spake unto Joshua, set up my tabernacle here and plant it there for all time. But it seems to be a good central location geographically. It's Shiloh means a place of rest. It seems to be that in Shiloh there are archaeological digs who say there is likely a hill in that area that is likely where the tabernacle was set up. So many thousands of years later, can we really be sure the way that topography changes? They say that they can be, or at least they convince themselves that they can be. But it's not our purpose to try to prove archaeologists correct or incorrect in an exercise like this. We want to see what happened at Shiloh, and why did that place not get chosen as the place for the temple to be built. Just if you want to make reference of a few of the different areas where the tabernacle appears outside of Shiloh, we'll turn quickly to 1 Samuel 21. 1 Samuel 21 verse 1, it says, Then came David to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? And as the story goes on, we know that this is when David is fleeing from Saul, and he receives the showbread and the men that are with him for food on the trip. Well, the showbread was in the tabernacle. So he comes to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and receives the showbread. So he has to be at the tabernacle to receive the showbread. So we know that the tabernacle was in Nob. And if we come over again to 1 Kings chapter 3, and verses 3 and 4, it says, Solomon loved Yahweh, walking in the statutes of David his father, only he sacrificed and burnt incense in high places. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. 1,000 burnt offerings did Solomon offer upon that altar. And some have said that that would be the tabernacle as well. The great high place would be the tabernacle. We know later, or earlier from this point, earlier in the story, when David goes out to the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, it says that he feared to go to the tabernacle because of the angel, and the tabernacle was in Gibeah at that season. So we'll consider that in one of our next couple of classes, but there seems to have been that circuit that the tabernacle went on, and yet back in 1 Samuel chapter 2, we have some words that show up for the first time in relation to a sanctuary, a temple for Yahweh, and they're in relation to Shiloh. So we'll just pick a few of these out in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 9. It says, "So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by a post of the temple of Yahweh." And again, that's not a mistranslation. That shouldn't be tabernacle or tent there. It is temple. So there was a large public building, a permanent style structure there for the worship of Yahweh. We have no record of what it looked like, what shape it was, what it was made out of, who designed it, who built it, where the materials came from. But there is evidence here, and if we turn over to 1 Samuel 3, just some of the easy ones to show that there was some kind of a structure here. 1 Samuel 3, verse 3, we have this, of course, chapter 3 is the calling of Samuel to service. And we have in verse 3 that ere the lamp of God went out in the temple of Yahweh, where the ark of Yahweh was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep, that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, "Here am I." And again, that's the word for temple. There's also reference throughout these first few chapters of the door. There's a physical door. It's not a curtain anymore. It's a door. So there are a few hints, if we are carefully reading through our scriptures, to tell us that there was some kind of a structure here, a building that the ark was in, that the tabernacle's contents resided in when it was not on its circuit throughout the nation. Now, the hymn that we opened with this morning, you may have noticed, we read from the latter part of 1 Samuel 2, verses 11 to the end. But that hymn that we sang, hymn 104, is based on the prayer of Hannah, the first 10 verses of 1 Samuel 2. That prayer that shows the faith of this woman who, in time of great trial, recognized that there was only one who could save, there was only one who could lift up, there was only one who could exalt, and it was to him that she should make her appeal. And the rest of that chapter, as we go through, reveals the wickedness of the system that she had to deal with. It reveals the wickedness of Eli, the wickedness of his sons, and we might extrapolate from that the great depression that the people of Israel would feel, having a wicked priesthood leading them in service. Eli is rebuked for not controlling his sons. His sons are rebuked for their wickedness by their father, somewhat emptily, because he has no force behind his rebuke. He doesn't follow through on anything. But he does try to rebuke them. They're rebuked by God himself in the judgment that he brings upon them. And they're rebuked for us to see, for we are told some of the wicked acts that they performed. But so wicked were these priests that we read about the attitude that they had towards their service. They have lost their perspective of the great privilege they have as priests of the Most High God, of being selected from among the nations to the nation of Israel, from being selected from among the nation of Israel to the tribe of Levi, from being selected from among the tribe of Levi to the family of Aaron. This tiny fraction of the nation that's allowed to perform these duties and to be that mediator between man and their God. They have lost the perspective of that great privilege, and they see it as an opportunity for personal gain. And we read in verse 17, "Wherefore the sin of the young men was very great before Yahweh, for men abhorred the offering of Yahweh." Now, the King James is a little bit troubling there if we just read it that way. Most other translations, including the literal translations of the Hebrew to the English, which are often more difficult to read, put another word in there in that second half of the verse. It's not for men abhorred the offering of Yahweh, but the men. So the sin of the young men was very great before Yahweh, for the men abhorred the offering of Yahweh. That's their attitude towards their work. They hate it. They hate doing it. They despise it. They look at it as a simple thing, as perhaps irrelevant in the time that they live. And they tried to seek some way of personal gain out of it, some way to bully the Israelites so that they could get what they wanted, and they could convince the Israelites that this is what they needed to do to serve their God. The temple of Yahweh in Shiloh had become a place not of rest as it was intended, but a place of wickedness and violence, where the priests would seize your offering from you if you did not give it to them. No longer are you allowed to offer the fat of the offering in dedication to Yahweh, and it would rise as a sweet-smelling savor to him, but the priests would seize it from you, physically, forcefully, violently, if you did not give it to them. How would that affect the mindset of the nation? Would they still want 3 times a year to come up to Shiloh and present themselves before Yahweh? At the Feast of Tabernacles, at the Passover, at the dedicated seasons that they're supposed to present themselves for these things? Well, the same terminology that's used about what happens to the nation as a result of the sins of Hophni and Phinehas is used about Jeroboam. If we turn over to 1 Kings 13, keep your hand there in 1 Samuel. We turn over to 1 Kings 13, very familiar territory about the sins of Jeroboam, where he likewise, in a somewhat different way, but likewise has taken the principles of the truth and twisted them for his own personal gain. Hophni and Phinehas were still before the tabernacle, twisting the principles and the roles that were given to them for their own gain. Jeroboam has set up his own system, foggily based on the principles of the truth, to confuse the nation and make them think that this was sufficient. But what he did is recorded as affecting the nation of Israel in a very specific way. So 1 Kings 13, verse 33, "After this thing Jeroboam returned not from his evil way, but made again of the lowest of the people priests of the high places. Whosoever would, he consecrated him, and he became one of the priests of the high places. And this thing became sin unto the house of Jeroboam, even to cut it off and to destroy it from off the face of the earth." And of course, that's the curse that's put on the house of Eli. They would be cut off from the role of priest. If any of them happened to remain, then they would have to beg the one who would be in that position for some measure of service, some measure of provision and care. And the only one that is allowed to be spared from that curse on the house of Jeroboam, if we eliminate the chapter break there, the thing became sin in verse 34 unto the house of Jeroboam, even to cut it off and to destroy it from off the face of the earth. And at that time, Abijah, the son of Jeroboam, fell sick. And we're told later on that there was something good seen in him, and he was taken. But as soon as this is recorded, if we eliminate that chapter break, we read in verse 34 that his house would be cut off and destroyed from the face of the earth. In the very next verse, his son gets sick. That's how God views those who would take away, who would use his service, his organization of things for their own profit, for their own gain. And of course, we know the phrase that is very familiar to us in relation to the sin of Jeroboam. It becomes a mantra throughout the time of the kings of Israel and some of the kings of Judah that they did not depart from the ways of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. He led them down the wrong path, and he made it easy for them to sin. Jeroboam convinces them that this is the right thing to do, and he sets up a system that makes it easy for them to do it. Whereas Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, do it by force. The same thing is recorded, that it made Israel to sin, that he led them down the wrong path. And if we go back to 1 Samuel 2, we'll see that Eli recognizes that. Eli recognizes that what they are doing is not just their own sin, but they are now causing others to sin. So 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 22, we read this already. Eli was very old and heard all that his sons did unto all Israel, and how they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, which incidentally, Phinehas should have known what his namesake did to those who laid with the women at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. His namesake would have never engaged in what he was engaging in. Verse 23, he said unto them, Why do ye such things? For I hear of your evil doings by all this people. Nay, my sons, for it is no good report that I hear. Ye make Yahweh's people to transgress. You're making it so they have to. You're forcing them to. You're leading them down the wrong path. You should be those whose lips keep knowledge, and they should seek the law at your mouth. But instead, you are causing them to transgress. You are taking their willing sacrifice by violence for your own purposes. And for that reason, God delivers a prophecy not about Shiloh, but about the priests who served at Shiloh. The priests that in 1 Samuel 1 verse 14 and 16 seem to expect that the women around the area of the tabernacle of this temple in Shiloh are drunkards. Priests, we're told in chapter 2 verse 12, didn't know Yahweh. Well, we know from Malachi and from other passages that that was their responsibility, not only to know Yahweh, but to proclaim him, to proclaim his law, to keep those things as a treasure for the nation and make them accessible to them. But these priests themselves didn't know Yahweh. 1 Samuel 2 verse 17 says that the priests were the worst sinners in Israel, for they abhorred the offering of Yahweh. The sin of the young men was very great. Fornication and adultery were at the site of worship, and they made Yahweh's people to transgress. And God would not idly stand by and allow this. He would not allow the Ark of the Covenant to be watched over by those who despised the offerings that brought his people near to it. So the prophecy in relation to Eli is not in relation to Shiloh specifically, but outworks itself so that God extricates the Ark of the Covenant from this wicked environment and sends the Ark once again on a wandering in the wilderness. Some of the people do follow it, as in the past. Some of the people are thrilled to have it arrive at their doorstep. And some, as it were, put it in a tarp in the backyard, not knowing what to do with it. The prophecy about Eli in 1 Samuel 2, verse 27 to 36 is, we've had this read. It lays out the reason and the result. Why God is going to do this and what it is that it will mean for him. We'll pick a verse out here that says in verse 33, The man of thine whom I shall not cut off from mine altar shall be to consume thine eyes and to grieve thine heart, and all the increase of thine house shall die in the flower of their age. Now we've already been told earlier in 1 Samuel 2 that these were young men. They're serving as priests. They're at least 30 years old. And the term young men is applied to those who are in their 40s, so they're in the prime of their life. They have experience, they have knowledge, they have physical strength. God says they're going to die in the flower of their age because of what they've done. And this is going to be a generational effect. Your family line is not going to end right here, but anyone who survives is not going to make it to a ripe old age. There's going to be a curse upon your household because of what you have done in despising my offering. And we come through an interesting aside. We come through to the end of chapter 2 in verses 35 and 36, where it says, I will raise me up a faithful priest that shall do according to that which is in mine heart and in my mind, and I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before mine anointed forever. And then verse 36 is back to the curse upon the house of Eli. Now, your center margin might take you from 1 Samuel 2, verse 35, to references related to Zadok. And that's correct that this is talking about the house of Zadok, which would replace the house of Eli for the role of the high priest. This happens in the time of Solomon. But you notice the language. It's language that we would think, taken out of context, was from 2 Samuel 7. Not from 1 Samuel 2. I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before mine anointed forever. This is a promise, in that respect, on the par with the promises given to David. And it's given to a priest. So we have a sure house for the king, and a sure house for the priest. Neither of which, we might say, is talking about the temple, but talking about a greater house and a greater role, a greater lineage that we all hope to be members of. Both members of that sure house being king priests. So, as we try to progress through the storyline here, we have before us a familiar story of Hophni and Phinehas now in the next few chapters making a fatal error. So we have to try to summarize these next few chapters and not go into all the detail. As I said, we're trying to follow the ark and to lay the context of why the ark had to be removed from this false temple in Shiloh. This temple that had become a place of wickedness instead of a place of rest. So Hophni and Phinehas have this curse laid upon them. Their father has told them about their wickedness. They refuse to change. The nation of Israel goes to war against the Philistines, and they're losing the battle. And the nation of Israel has had their minds poisoned against the truth by the priests that should have been encouraging it. And so the nation of Israel says, what we need is to bring the Ark of the Covenant, because the Ark of the Covenant has always saved us in the past. Ignoring the fact that it's not the Ark, it's the relationship that the Ark represents between God and his people. That is what has saved them. But they view it, unfortunately, as a talisman that can be called upon to release its magical powers and save them in times of trial. So they send for the Ark of the Covenant. The priests bring it. Perhaps it was Hophni and Phinehas alone. Perhaps there was more. Some calculations put the weight of the Ark of the Covenant well over 750 pounds, with the weight of the gold that was on it and the box and the staves and the contents that were in it. Be a difficult trek for two men to carry on staves by themselves. So it's likely there were two more of their relatives that would carry that with them. They come into the camp, and of course we know the exultant reply of the nation, that they think God is now with us because this Ark of the Covenant has come into our presence. Little did they know that it was the design of God to bring calamity upon them by the deliverance that they sought. And of course, the Ark is captured by not just anybody, but by their worst enemies. That nation that would be the thorn on their side forever until the time that Christ himself takes it away. And it's taken away from them, away from the wickedness of Shiloh, away from the wicked priests away from Eli, who doesn't fall over dead at the knowledge that his sons have died, but falls over dead when he realizes the extreme that his sons have brought the situation to. That it's not just that the priesthood is taken out of the way. It's not just that the sons of Eli and his descendants will be forbidden from service, but God has removed his mercy and the seat of it from the nation. And so the ark goes on a journey once again. The ark, for lack of time, we won't go to all of these passages, but we have as we go through the next few chapters, we see the ark go to the house of Dagon, where it humbles the house and it smashes the house of Dagon. We have it go throughout the land of the Philistines, going from one city of the Philistines to another city of the Philistines, and for some reason, the lords of the Philistines kept accepting it, even though the place it's coming from is experiencing plagues of mice and emerods and massive amounts of death in their young men. One king of the Philistines says, hey, do you want to take this? Oh, sure, we'll take it. What does it do? Oh, don't ask. And the Philistines are dying left and right, and to the point where they get together and they say, we have to do something. Let's send it back to where it should be. Let's send it back into Israel. And they devise this way to do it that unfortunately is copied a generation later. So it ends up back in Israel at the field of Joshua the Beth Shemeshite. He rejoices to see it. They offer offerings of the oxen that he's plowing with and that he's laboring with, and the materials of the yoke, the farming instruments, and they rejoice. The ark is back. Perhaps God has come back to bless us once again. But the people's minds are still poisoned. They don't know the law, and they make a fatal error, and they open the ark and look inside. And the record says that over 50,000 men died as a result of that. Does that mean that 50,000 men looked inside? That would be quite a lineup. Or is it a progressive effect? Those who looked in bring the judgment, but there were many who were deserving of the judgment. So they send it off to send to Kirjath Jearim to come and get the ark. The ark goes to the house of Abinadab. And of course, Abinadab has two sons that are sanctified to serve before the ark. And generations later, or decades later, we'll say, the timeline is somewhat foggy at this point, it leaves his house the same way that it came back into Israel, on a new cart with oxen or cows of some sort at the front. And of course, doesn't get very far, because one of Abinadab's sons now dies as a result of not knowing the law. Decades later, that weakness is still there, and they have still not sought the law where it can be found. So the ark, though it is the seat of mercy and the throne of grace, travels around Israel, trying in God's way to bring them back to him, to show them the error of their ways, to reveal to them the need to return to him in the proper way. And after being misunderstood as a means to physical salvation, the ark spends years and years and years, once again, in a sense, wandering through the wilderness. And there's no great company of Israelites following after it, but there are those whose hearts seek it. There are those who desire to see a permanent resting place for the presence of their God with them. In our next couple of classes, we hope to consider King David, his desire to not bring a physical structure into another physical structure, but to give his God a resting place, to give his king a palace in the midst of the nation that he has called for himself.